Everybody. Um, it is good to see everyone today. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce a colleague of mine who I admire greatly, Flower Darby. I met Flower earlier this year, um, or was maybe possibly last year in COVID time. You know, the calendar has just been ripped off the shelf permanently. Um, we were at an AECT conference, and in a lot of these virtual conferences, you try to build a social component. And we were in a small breakout room together, and there was only a handful of us, but we really had a great conversation. We talked a lot about online teaching and pedagogy, and talked a lot about the learning sciences. And Flower just, I mean, information was just pouring from her, and she was just pouring out her experiences, and I was really picking up what she was putting down. So when Alex kindly invited me to join her and helping think through SUNY Online, Flower was the first name I came up with. I said, you gotta grab that person because she is just wonderful. So Flower, bless you for being here today. Thank you so much, my friend, my colleague. And if you do have an opportunity, folks, I will tell you, read Small Teaching Online. That's Flower's book. She co-authored. It is just practical. It's wise, and there are just some great plays you can add to your playbook, add to your repertoire to be a better instructor and a better instructional designer. So, without further ado, my colleague, Flower Darby.
Mark, thank you. That was way too kind. But yes, it is fun to connect even in the Zoomosphere, and I appreciate your warm welcome. And I appreciate everybody who is here today making the time to be here. I know we get a little tired of this space, but it's so wonderful to connect with you even in this way. And so thank you to Alex and Nancy for making all of this possible and for inviting me to contribute. It really is my pleasure and my privilege to do so. I have so much to share with you that I just have to jump right in. I just can't help it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up some slides. I will say that there are times during the presentation when I will invite you to engage with me in the chat box. It's always optional. No worries if you don't want to. And I will also encourage you to feel free to use the chat box for your own interaction, because I know that you all have some wonderful ideas and resources. And so feel free to collaborate there in chat. I won't be watching it until I look to see if you're answering me when I ask you questions. And then we will have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and Mark has kindly agreed to keep an eye on those. So feel free to pop them into the chat anytime that they come to mind, and we'll save a few minutes at the end to see what's on your mind as well. So we're here today to talk about the spark of online learning. It's my new book project, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this during the talk. But I would like to start by introducing myself for who I am when I'm not in my little Zoom box. I do spend a lot of time here, but this is my amazing family. My husband, Tim, is a strong partner and collaborator in my work. We have 3 teenage daughters, which is so awesome. And when it's not a global pandemic, we love to travel. There's a couple of pictures of us in London in the before times. And then you're going to see a little picture in the corner there of what online learning looked like at my house last year. All of my girls did fully online school. That's a picture of 2 of them playing a game on the living room floor while they're also in Zoom class. And so although it's not ideal, I know this is the reality that we are dealing with, and their experience and the efforts of their hardworking teachers has really broadened my perspectives and given me many new insights since I wrote Small Teaching Online, which is all about asynchronous teaching, really. So today's talk encompasses all the ways that we interact with students in virtual environments, whether it is asynchronous or synchronous like this, or an online component to an in-person class. So many blended and hybrid options are emerging, and those are here to stay. So we want to make sure that we can make the best of this environment and really engage our students, keep them motivated despite what I will say are the challenges of teaching in these spaces. I am going to start right away with a question for you. I would love to know, what is one word that describes the way you feel about online teaching? Again, any format, any version. Would you be willing to put a word into the chat box that tells me how you feel about online teaching? Excited, unpracticed, hopeful, energized, thankful, work, freedom, love it, uncertain, hopeful, time consuming, innovative, love it, hopeful, grateful, challenged, anxious, empowering, joyful, passionate, yes, good, awesome, flexible, confident, and affordances. Thank you, Robin, love it. access, hopeful, innovative, love it, yay. Those are 2 words, but I'm going to take those 2-word answers. Awesome. So we did see a big range of words coming in. And if you're still putting your word in, please do feel free to do that. Many of us do see the affordances and the opportunities, and we are excited about this. It is job security. I've bought lots of diapers by teaching online for many, many years. It is opportunities. And I think we also recognize that it is challenging. We don't feel prepared to do this because this is not what maybe we set out to do. I do believe that this is going to change, and maybe it is already changing, but I believe that many of us who are currently teaching didn't really set out to be awesome online educators. And yet that is what we have in front of us. And so what we're going to do today, and what we've been doing throughout this amazing summit, is really seeing how we can equip ourselves to be more effective. I don't want to gloss over some of the, less positive words that came in. It is frustrating, it is challenging, it is time consuming and tiring in ways that in-person teaching may not be. And I think it's important to recognize that range of experiences we're having. I would argue that at some point during your teaching experience, you have experienced all of those different kinds of emotions and situations. So just hold that word in mind. We're going to come back to it. And I would like to tell you about something that happened in my Pilates class a few years ago. Again, in the before times, I was getting ready to teach. So we didn't go through my whole bio, but I'll just mention, which is fine. I'll just mention that I have been teaching college classes for over 25 years in person and online. I teach English, technology, dance, Pilates, and leadership. So I love to see how different approaches and different principles apply in the studio and in the online classroom and physical, all these things. And so I was running in to teach Pilates at my local gym. And I followed a woman who had her rolled up yoga mat. And I was like, oh, good, somebody came to class, because it was a beautiful summer day. Well, I rounded the corner into the hallway where the studio is, and I saw her standing outside the open door. And I thought, why doesn't she go in? And immediately I answered myself, it's because she didn't know if she was supposed to. I wasn't there yet. So although the door was open, the lights were off, there was no music playing, nobody else was in the room. And I picked up on this really tangible sense of confusion, maybe even frustration. Am I in the right place at the right time? Is class even happening? And because I noticed that in the moment, I said, are you here for class? And she said, yes. I said, great, me too, come on in. We got the lights on, we got the music playing. More people showed up, and we proceeded to have a really amazing class. But it really got me thinking about the value of having other people around us, especially if we're going into an uncertain experience or an unfamiliar learning environment. And that is what is absolutely lacking in our online classes. Asynchronous, it's even worse. Synchronous, I would argue, this is not the same as if we were all in person together. The physical proximity of other people around us really makes a big difference in our emotional and mental well-being, in our ability to engage. And so that experience got me thinking a lot about how we help our online students who are physically isolated for the most part, how we help them engage and feel welcome and feel like they're in the right place at the right time, no matter when they click into our class. So today we're going to focus on how we connect with the people in our classes and foster connections among the people. I'm sure this is a theme that has been woven throughout this week's summit. We're also going to see how we can help students connect more deeply with class materials, concepts, information in order to learn that information more effectively. So I would just argue that during this time that we are in right now, there is a lot of anxiety that we are all experiencing. Even before we started this session, we were talking about events, world events right now, and how that is just so distracting, and we don't have all of our cognitive resources when we are burdened, when we are grieving, when we are anxious. And we are all very, very anxious for many valid reasons, and so are our students. And so one of my primary arguments is that these emotions come into our online spaces. We don't check them at the door. If you are logging in to teach online, whether it be synchronous or not, if you're logging in, Whatever you're feeling that day is going to come into your class. If you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling disconnected, if you're feeling challenged and unprepared, that can taint what happens in your class. But the good news is we can turn that around and we can put on really positive emotions and a really optimistic and encouraging mindset. And we can share that with our students to enliven our classes. Students, of course, also bring their emotions, their anxieties, their burdens. And this has been a very difficult season for all of us. So we want to see how we can support our students, recognize that they are whole people. They are not brains on sticks, which is a phrase I got from Susan Brock, who has a recent book out on embodied teaching and learning. We are all whole people and we need to connect in those ways. So thinking just for a moment about what we know about online classes, well, I would argue that we don't know enough. Again, this is changing. The pandemic has accelerated our learning curve, but just bear with me here for a minute and think about how much you know about what happens in physical classrooms based on your literal decades of experience being a student or a teacher in a physical classroom, and then compare that to the, I would say, lack of experience that we all collectively have online. When you walk into a physical room, you know what you're supposed to do. You expect to see tables or desks facing front with chairs. You know where the front of the room is because there's the whiteboard, the lectern, the slide, the computer. What am I talking about? The screen. You know what I'm saying. And in an online class, I would argue that we don't have those markers and we don't have those norms yet. The research is also not as robust as it is in person yet. We're getting there. This is changing. But when I think about my experience and what good online teaching and learning looks like, I believe I have a gap there. And so what we are going to help to look at today to inform our thinking, and again, you may already be familiar with this, and this may have already come up in this week, so I'm going to keep this very, very brief. But we're going to guide our thinking by way of the modified community of inquiry framework. And I do apologize, I should have a citation on this slide. It's Garrison et al. 2000, and I have also added in Cleveland, Innes, and Campbell 2012. So what we're doing here is we're looking at the ingredients of a good online class. Garrison and his colleagues did some research in the late 1990s to look at what goes into a really effective online learning experience. And they identified these three presences that you see depicted here in the center of this graphic. Now, to me, these are like ingredients. That's what we need. They need to combine in harmony to have a good effective, engaging, invigorating learning experience. The first one is intuitive to me, the cognitive presence. We're in a teaching and learning context. It's the thought work, what you have put into your online class in order to help your students be successful. And also it is the students' thought work. How are they processing new information, remembering it, understanding it, relating it to what they already know in order to make sense of it, applying it to solve problems in case studies and such. It's the thought work, and that makes sense. I would argue that we are still trying to figure out the other two presences, the teaching presence and the social presence. How do we greet our students in the hallway and say, hey, I'm glad you're here. Come on in, let's have a good class. How do we interact with our learners in these spaces to guide and facilitate their learning and do the kind of relational teaching that happens so naturally in the classroom? Well, I would argue that's what we're working on still. Now, for me, what has become very important is this concept of the emotional presence. A couple of researchers, Cleveland, Innes, and Campbell in 2012 published an article on proposing on their study, in which they proposed the addition of emotional presence, or to be very accurate, the separation of emotional presence from social presence. Now, some colleagues and I at Northern Arizona University have conceived of this as so impactful, so pervasive, that we came up with this graphic that shows emotional presence kind of impacting everything that we do. And it is, as we've already talked about, it's recognizing that we bring our emotions, but more than that, it's recognizing that emotions are so powerful. Thank you, Alex, for providing these links. Appreciate that. Emotions, as we're going to see in just a minute, really impact our ability to process information. They affect our memory, and so we can put them to work. And that's where we're going for the rest of this talk. We are going to look briefly at how emotion and cognition work, just a very brief overview of 5 ways that these two things work together. We're going to look at how emotions can help us connect with our students and engage them and help them to stay motivated. And then we are going to look at a handful of practical strategies as well that I would argue you could apply on Monday. work into your classes in true small teaching fashion. So this work is based on The Spark of Learning by Sarah Rose Kavanaugh. If you're not familiar with this book, it is awesome. It literally transformed my whole professional world. And it gave me permission to teach in the way that I wasn't sure that was allowed to teach, because it's all about putting emotions to work. Sarah argues that based on recent neuroscience, we now know that emotions and cognition are inextricably linked. Here in academia, we have long wanted to believe that the pursuit of knowledge should be cold and rational. There's no room for emotions here, but that's not actually true. We cannot think without involving our emotions, and they do grab our attention. They do motivate us, and they hold our working memory and our long-term memory. As Sarah has said before, or as she has written, cognitive resources are limited, emotion trumps. So if we neglect this area, we're doing ourselves and our students a disservice. We'll also be looking at the work of Mary Helen Imordino Yang. She's probably the leading researcher on affective science and how it interacts with education. And again, from her own research, she argues that these two processes are interdependent. You cannot separate them. So let's put them to work for us. Let's look at how these two things come together in 5 specific ways. Emotions absolutely grab our attention. We are wired to pay attention to the world around us and respond instantly to anything that we perceive as a threat. Just as an example, this is fight, flight, or freeze response. If we were to see something out of the corner of our eye that we perceive as danger, our brains release hormones and activate that physical adrenal response before we can even logically articulate what it was that happened. So recognizing the power of emotions to grab our attention and to, again, override all other systems, we can put these to work to get our students' attention, because I would argue it's an ongoing battle to do that. And same with motivation. So emotions absolutely motivate us. Now, here we are coming out of the pandemic. I hope we're seeing some recent revised guidelines from the CDC and some recent changes in the way we're doing things. Well, I personally have been sitting in this little box for a long time, and I would like to get a little bit more in shape before I start really getting back out into the world again. So I'm starting a new fitness program. And by the way, this is a little bit hypothetical, but just kind of bear with me here. If I were starting a new fitness program, and maybe it's a 30-day program, and on day 1 I log in and I do my home video, I'm going to feel really pumped and excited about that, and I'm going to be more motivated to log in on day 2 and do that day's workout. On the other hand, if I miss day 1, guess what? I'm going to feel discouraged. That is going to be demotivating. I might be tempted to just give up. So we can put emotions to work in terms of motivating our students as well to do the work that we know they need to do to be successful. Emotions absolutely maximize working memory, which is another way of talking about our focus and our attention in the moment. As we know, working memory is extremely limited. We have like a little tiny spotlight. We can't pay attention to a lot of things all the time. So if we want to get our students focused, and I would say this applies, much of today's talk applies in person as well as in online environments. If we want to hold our students' attention on the task at hand, when we engage and evoke their emotions, we're going to have a much better chance of doing so. And certainly emotions maximize our long-term memories. We think about the experience that we are in right now and have been in for the last 2 years. I believe that when we look back on this time, we are going to have some very, very vivid picture perfect memories of the time that we have been in. For example, one of my strongest memories from this season was being at the graveside service of the man who I would consider to be my second dad, who welcomed me into his home and was a father figure to me when I was living with my single mom. And so, those are vivid images. Those are impactful memories. And when we think about any experience that is imbued with emotions, with strong and powerful emotions, that's going to crystallize those memories and that information. It works the same way in our teaching and learning. Helping students associate emotions or connect emotionally with what they're learning is going to actually help them remember that information, retain it, and have it available to use for other activities that we're doing. And then, similar to what we were talking about a few minutes ago with motivation, emotions actually act like a little bit of a rudder so to speak, in terms of steering, and not even a little bit. They actually act like a rudder in helping us make decisions. And when we think about this in an academic context, let's imagine that a third grade student raises the hand and wants to ask a question, and their teacher is really demeaning and just really insulting, and just really, maybe she's having a bad day, maybe he's just not not doing very well that particular moment. Well, that negative experience and that pain that that student experiences is going to impact and influence their willingness to raise their hand literally ever again. They're going to have a painful negative association with asking for help. But on the flip side, let's say you're a college student, it's your first semester, and you work really hard for that math test. You're worried about math, but you really study and do extra practice, and you get in there, you take that test, and you get an A. Well, that elation is going to motivate you and help you decide to engage in those productive behaviors there, from there on. This happened to me in my very first semester. I took a class that was extremely challenging as a literature major, and I got an A, and I literally wanted to turn cartwheels when I saw what my grade was, and that motivated my hard work in my classes for the rest of my college career, really. So emotions really are very, very powerful. I would argue that they're the most powerful thing that we can put to work, especially in the challenging environment that I would say is our online space. So let's put these power tools to work. Let's see how we can engage them. And again, just a reminder, and this is fascinating to me. So here's a big takeaway right here. Imordino Yang has argued that it is literally neurobiologically impossible to think about things you don't care about. Think about that just for a minute. You can't think about something if you don't really deeply care about it, or you can't deeply think about something if you don't care about it. That is just mind-blowing to me. So a big takeaway is to help your students care about what they're learning, help them see the relevance, help them see the usefulness, help them see how it relates to their everyday experience, how it's going to help them. We heard this in yesterday's talk on culturally responsive online teaching, that when students see how practical and relevant what they're learning is going to be, it will help them to feel and be more successful in our classes. So yeah, chew on this one later on over dinner. Tell your partner or your family or your dog, you can't think about something you don't care about. Think about committee work. Have you ever had committee work that you don't really see the value of it, and it seems kind of tedious and mundane, and you're not really fully invested? That's this principle at work. So fascinating. So we're going to look at how emotion and academic achievement work together. For example, we know that positive emotions predict academic achievement in a way that seems like a no-brainer to me. If we're enjoying and feeling positive and successful about what we're doing, it will motivate, again, those productive study behaviors. But there is actual robust evidence to prove this, because the positive emotions actually facilitate self-regulated learning. And that is when our students take responsibility for their own learning and set their goals, develop strategies, enact those strategies, monitor those approaches and see if they're working through that evaluation, and then adjust if needed. All of those behaviors really predict academic success. Now, on the flip side, we know that negative emotions impede cognitive engagement. And we just referred briefly to, for example, math anxiety. We know that when we are worried about something, when we are giving into feeling like, for example, imposter phenomenon or stereotype threat, all of those kinds of things detract from our ability to engage our cognitive resources. So what we want to do is to think about how we can maximize positive and minimize negative learning experiences. Now, I've been talking for a few minutes here. If anybody would like to take a moment at this time and just kind of share a few thoughts, a few words about either just in general response to where we've been, or how are some ways that you maximize positive and minimize negative, feel free to put that in the chat. And I do see Peter's excellent question. I'll take that question, and then feel free to keep on adding your own thoughts and comments in the chat box as well. So great question, Peter. And I guess my gut response is, well, we can't necessarily undo the experiences that students may have had previous, but here's what we can do, is to foster a sense of well-being and help our students to know very clearly that we are here to support and encourage them. I would also think about whether there is opportunity to talk with our students about, let's say you really get excited about how emotions impact cognition. Maybe it's a conversation that you have with your class and you talk about, there's all kinds of reasons that students enter into our classes with mistrust, with fear, with anxiety based on prior life experiences, opportunity gaps, negative educational experiences and such. And so maybe just talking to our students about, we want to try to set aside any negative associations or fear or mistrust and work to create a positive learning environment. Again, whether it's something you talk about or something you enact through the strategies I'm about to share with you here today, I do believe that we can show our students, teach our students that they are in a safe place now and that we are supporting them and encouraging them. So I did see some chats come in, but I'm not reading them because, as you know, it's hard to read and think and talk all at the same time. But I appreciate those of you who have put those things into the chat box. Just a quick scroll lets me see that you are putting in lots of great ideas and comments here. So thank you for doing that. We are going to turn our attention now to what can we do if we're in these online environments. And again, I would argue that a lot of these things can apply in general. So I would encourage you to be thinking about, no matter where you teach, whether it is with your voice students or with your dance students, in a lab, in a classroom, online, how can we put emotions to work? So first thing that I think is so important is to sustain a welcoming tone. Now, what I mean by this is, and it does relate back to that story about Pilates, we need to help our students feel that they are welcomed, they are supported, they are included. And especially, again, this is culturally responsive, this is equity focused. When our students feel that they're in the right place at the right time and that they belong in this community, they will be better able and better motivated to engage cognitively. So here's what I mean about sustaining a welcoming tone. Think about asynchronous online classes. Many of us, myself included, recommend that you have a welcome video or some kind of all about me video. By the way, that's why I have that introduction slide at the beginning, is to foster this kind of connection with you. That's I didn't comment on it then, but anything at the beginning of your class that helps your students see you as a real person is going to help create these emotional connections with you. It is going to help students feel welcome. They need to see that you are a real person. So if you're teaching synchronous, maybe a slide like that. Maybe you don't want to show the pictures of your family's faces, that's fine. Pets, destinations, travel locations, hobbies, all of these things help students get to know you as a person. Same with a welcome video, which I highly recommend, but here's my thing, is that we have to do more than just the first week or the first day of class. We have to sustain that throughout the duration of the class in what is being called a relentless welcome, which Peter Felton and Leo Lambert have written about in their recent relationship-rich education book. Highly recommend it. We want to keep on welcoming our students so that no matter when they click into class, they feel like the lights are on, the music is playing, and they are in the right place at the right time. This has to do with the way that we communicate with our students. For example, making a deliberate effort to infuse support, optimism, and encouragement into the way that we talk and write to our students. I'm teaching an asynchronous class right now. It started on Thursday, and I make a deliberate effort in every written or video communication to bring enthusiasm, because our energy and our enthusiasm invigorates our students and livens them up. Positive and encouraging facial expressions, vocal tones, writing in the words that we choose really can go a long way to help students feel welcome. We want to be available to them. We want to be present and engaged in our online classes. A 2020 study came out mostly regarding pre-pandemic, but the #1 complaint that online students came, this was a survey of over 2,000 undergraduate students, #1 complaint is that their instructor is not there. We have to be there for our students in order to demonstrate to them that we are welcoming to them. So I have a few other recommendations on this note, but let's move on to the importance of being yourself. Now, it's really good to really, again, bring that whole person. I have chosen to show you my family because they are a big part of how I engage with my students as well. I'm always learning from my daughters, from their experience. By the way, they have told me, I'm not kidding, that their online teachers are not real people. They have told me that. And so this is what I mean, right? We have to kind of bring our whole selves and be ourselves. Now you will notice, and the next slide's I'm going to preview the next slide here. I bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm and passion to what I do. Maybe this isn't you. Maybe when you're teaching, you have a much quieter and more compelling persona. I mentioned earlier Peter Felton. If you ever heard him speak, he is, wow, a very different style than I am, and he holds your attention because he's so passionate. He's so compelling in his delivery, and that's what I mean. When I write to my online students, I'm a natural cheerleader. Hey, everybody, like let's say there's an announcement. You're doing a great job so far. Can't believe how far you've come this semester. Let's keep it going. Keep the good work up. Well, that is literally how I am. But if that's not how you are, don't try to write that announcement. You have to be yourself. Maybe that's by way of sharing memes in announcements. Maybe that's by way of sharing silly pictures of your pets, whatever it is. Help your students see who you are as a person. This happens very naturally in the classroom. We need to make an extra effort to have this happen online. And one of the ways that I do this is to absolutely bring my passion to energize the atmosphere. I would encourage you to do this as well. This is one of the ways that we can sustain that welcome and to bring our own vibrant personalities. So this is based on the idea of emotional contagion, which is a phenomenon well documented by which we impact and we are impacted by the emotions of the people around us. You have seen this in action. Sometimes you have taught a class and you come out and you're like, wow, everybody was on fire that day. Other times you come out of your classroom, you're like, man, everybody was kind of blah. What was going on today? That is emotional contagion, and you can put it to work in your online spaces. This is why I am literally acting like a clown right now. I'm projecting about 300% energy to you right through the webcam. This is exhausting. When we're done, I'm going to collapse in a heap on the floor. But right now, I'm with you. I'm literally sitting up in my chair. Maybe you prefer to teach standing so that you can bring all your physical energy. When you're teaching to a camera, we have to amplify our presentation, our energy, as Karen Costa says in her excellent book, 99 Tips regarding, I don't remember the rest of the title, sustainable, easy educational videos. Alex will probably find that. Thank you in advance if you can. Anyway, she argues that the camera eats energy. We have to amplify and over project, whether we're teaching live or by recorded video. Bring your extra presentation energy. I'm making a strong effort to make eye contact with you through the camera, big smiles, lots of positivity that I am bringing because I am literally very passionate about how good online teaching can be. And I want to share that with you. It energizes. We can be the sun in our online classes. Now, again, we can do this through the way that we write, as I mentioned before. When I write announcements that are very encouraging and kind of cheerleading or motivating, think about yourself as a coach or a mentor. Ways to infuse positivity and encourage your students because your energy will enliven your students. And by the way, they feed that back to you then. So if you're feeling disconnected or fatigued or isolated or frustrated or challenged in your online classes, one of the best things you can do is pour out more of your energy. It's not an endless drain. It's going to come back and recharge your teaching battery. So one last really practical way to bring passion, in addition to speaking with enthusiasm and energy to the camera, writing, whether it's announcements, discussion posts, assignment feedback, whatever, write with your enthusiasm for what you teach, right? It's not necessarily about the fact that we're in an online class for you, but bring your disciplinary passion and your enthusiasm. I know you care about your students and you want them to succeed. Bring that passion into your interactions. And one last, again, practical thing, if you're out in the world somewhere or you're online and you see something that gets your attention, you're like, wow, that is fascinating. That's why we're learning what we're learning, because of that. Well, bring it in, bring it into your class with a link, a post, a blog, a video, and say, look, this is why we're learning what we're learning, because your interest, your passion will invigorate your students. So I could go on about all that all day, but I'm going to move to another big recommendation, and I'll talk briefly about how this works. Designing for emotion is just the idea that we're keeping at the forefront of our mind the power of emotions to engage our attention and memory and such. And for me, anything that we can do that creates an opportunity and experience that is more emotionally evocative is going to be much more powerful and engaging. Two big categories for me. I like to think about the way that we present our material. you could have, and this is a very timely and relevant example, you could have a very robust analysis of what's happening in Ukraine right now. And if you just put it in words, it's a wall of text, and your students are just going to get disengaged by that boring wall of text. Once again, my daughters have told me, I hate it when there's all this information in Canvas. So the instant that you put an image, the media does this all the time, right? The minute that you put a photo or maybe a short video of the actual impact of what's happening in that crisis situation, and you've got your students like this in a very, very different way. So let's put those kinds of marketing strategies that, advertisers do this as well. The media does this. I would argue we can use all the help that we can get in these online spaces, put intentional, emotionally evocative media in your robust analyses. And of course, you could break those up as well to help get your students' attention. Now, you can also think, for example, this is how Shakespeare teachers have been teaching forever. In order to bring the dry words to life, we show videos, we show movies. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I have a friend who teaches poetry in an online asynchronous class, and he provides audio recordings of the poets narrating their poems because their intonations, their performance, the emotion that we can hear in their voices brings out the meaning. So think about the way we present material in order to grab and connect with students' emotions. And the other big category for me is the activities that we give our students. Again, anything that evokes an emotional response is powerful, much more engaging. I know a biology instructor who has his students go to the local Target, Walmart, grocery store, take a sample from the shopping cart handle, analyze it for the microbes that are in that handle. I mean, in that sample, gross, right? Disgusting, but also fascinating and relevant. I use that shopping cart every week. So to anything that we can give our students to do that brings the learning to life, that grabs their emotions, again, they're going to be more naturally engaged. I have a friend who teaches pop culture in literature and film in an online environment. She, in a discussion forum, asks her students to describe one superpower that they would choose. And it's such a fun discussion. It's not hard to elicit discussion responses when it's something fun that students want to talk about. And then by way of her facilitation, she encourages students to think about class themes as well: character development, authorial motivation. Now I have another, let's talk about how else we can design for emotion, because that's, again, kind of a big category. One of the things that we can do is to engage students' curiosity and interest. To demonstrate this, I'm going to invite you to play a little trivia game with me. By chance, if you've seen this talk before, don't give away the answers, but I'm going to ask 3 questions based on research from 2017 survey of over 13,000 faculty members teaching 2-year and 4-year classes, institutions. And these are pre-pandemic. These are people who taught online or who never taught online. So if you would guess these responses, 3 trivia questions from this survey. What percentage of those 13,400 faculty members believe that online teaching makes it more possible for more people to go to school, online education? Do more people have access to a college credential because of online education? 89%, 20%, 100, 90, 40, 60, 90, 35, 10, 85, 100, 30. We're all over the map today. The answer is 79% in 2017 believed that this makes it more possible. What percentage of those respondents thought that online education doesn't work, that students don't learn as much? 79%, 25, 30, 50, 72, 32, 55, 15, 85, 50, yes, almost half. Now, I find that very motivating because I believe, in fact, the research shows online education can absolutely be as effective, if not more so, when we do it well. That's the key. Last question from here. What percentage of those faculty respondents prefer to teach online? Don't really need to teach in person anymore. Love teaching online. Again, this is pre-pandemic, primarily asynchronous. 60, 50, 8, 75, 35. We're all over the place. 15, 65, 40, 60, 34, 9% of faculty respondents in 2017 said, I prefer teaching online. Well, here again, I believe that we can love teaching online, but this particular statistics motivates me. Now, let me explain what we did here. I was designing for curiosity and interest in the way that I was asking you to guess the outcome of these particular questions. So I know that once you put your number in, you were on the edge of your seat. You could hardly wait to find out what the real answer was. And that's how this works. Okay, I know I'm being silly, but getting your students to guess, to wonder, to predict, asking your students questions, giving them things that they might naturally be curious about, that is an awesome and very effective way to engage those knowledge emotions of curiosity and interest. So on this note, we can ask interesting questions and we can design interesting scenarios. There's research to show in economics class, students in the control group were given well, all the students were told you have to make a project plan, a business plan to open a coffee shop in a neighborhood and see how it's going to create a margin, turn a profit. Wow, words. In the experiment group, students were given a story. Here's the neighborhood you're going to be opening your coffee shop in. Here are the people who will be coming in every day. Here's the incentives and the goals and the rewards. And the researchers were able to show a statistically significant, deeper and better understanding of economics concepts because there was a story. So use stories, use case studies, create personas, relate what we're learning to our everyday experiences, and you will more naturally engage your students. I'm also going to encourage us, and I'm coming up to the end of all my strategies here. I know it's kind of fire hose. Maybe there's one or two things that you want to choose and remember from today. Come back to the recording or your notes later to look for other things. But so we're going to wrap up here soon. I am going to encourage us to look for ways to build rapport and trust. As we talked about earlier, our students can feel very anxious. They can feel extremely uncertain. They can feel isolated and as if you are not there, especially in an asynchronous class. It's really easy for students to feel that way. Some fascinating research that came out in 2021, I think, maybe 2020. Rebecca Glazier is the lead author on this. The researchers designed a very simple experiment where they created two different asynchronous online modules. One had pretty much nothing in there about the instructor, no guidance, no feedback, just very kind of cut and dry, kind of transactional, go through and do your things. And in the other module, there was a picture of an instructor, which by the way, was just a stock photo, but at least there was a face with the instructor's name. There was some guidance about how to get started on the class. There was immediate feedback on the token quiz. There was kind of an example quiz after a reading. And the researchers, not surprisingly, were able to clearly demonstrate that students in that second module were more willing to spend more time there. They were more engaged, more clicks, and more persistence. So anything that we can do to help our students see us as real people and build the rapport, even by way of providing a little bit of guidance, some instructions, that's actually going to build trust. And when we have that trusting environment, students will feel safe, they will feel that they belong, they will have more cognitive capacity to engage. Just a couple of other ideas to finish up with here. As we know, designing for choice invites learners to, again, choose what they're interested in, right? It comes back to that. And so giving options wherever we can. And we're going to be looking at universal design for learning for this one. Again, this is probably not a new idea to many of you who are here today, but there is a whole element, the whole guideline in UDL, which is about emotional engagement because it is so powerful. Giving learners choice, maybe it's they can post an asynchronous written post or a video. Maybe it's that they have a topic choice of what they're going to research for their presentation or project. Yesterday in the culturally responsive session, we heard about helping students to find out, choose to find out more about the water quality in their own neighborhood as an example. So inviting choice wherever we can is just one simple way to engage more of an emotional connection. And just in case you're going, okay, how are we going to add in all these choices? In case you haven't come across the amazing Tom Tobin, I love his work with Kristen Bailing on +1 thinking in their book, Reach Everyone, Teach Everyone. The idea of adding one little choice, one little option here and there as we teach each class, and those kind of build up in an iterative fashion. And then finally, the last recommendation that I will have for you is to really bring fun into our classes. A couple of pieces here that we can look to, I love the work of Lisa Forbes and some colleagues of hers, thinking about how games can build those relationships, foster that community, foster that kind of trust and that well-being, that positivity. So I love her points about sometimes just games, just for fun, just to build, again, relationship and help people feel confident and comfortable, or what we can do in asynchronous classes. And of course, we all know there are learning games that we can implement, again, online, whether that be Kahoot or other kinds of ways to bring fun into our classes in order to foster that deeper motivation, engagement, and cognitive processing as well. So I'm going to finish with one question for you. I got some really great answers the first time I asked this. I'm curious now. What is one word that describes the way you feel about online teaching? Has your word changed? Is it the same? Love to know what's on your mind as we wrap up these slides, and we're going to open it up now for questions and your conversations and your ideas. So Maggie says she feels amazing. There is opportunity. Thank you, Cheryl. Possibilities, ideal, encourage, still exciting. Same word. I love it. Creative, hopeful, vibrant. Yes, we can be vibrant in these spaces and we can support our students. It's an equity imperative to create really invigorating online experiences, because many of our students who choose to take online wouldn't be otherwise able to take college classes. So innovative, excited to experiment, energetic, inspired, not expired. Good. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to take a sip of water and we'll see whether any questions have come in or what other questions we have at this time.
Flower, thank you so much. There's been a lot of chatter in the chat box. I've been monitoring it. Not sure if I missed any of the questions, but Flower, do you want them to type it in chat, or is it okay if people unmute?
Yeah, I feel like we have a little bit of time that if somebody wants to raise a Zoom hand and unmute, that's fine, or putting in the chat box is great. And meanwhile, again, I know there were some good contributions that came into the chat that I didn't see, so feel free to highlight those and bring those to my attention too. Ooh. Maureen Larson asks an awesome question. And Mark, if you don't mind, if I see the question, I'll just address it. But if I'm missing something, Mark, please feel free, or if I'm missing a hand, feel free to just interrupt me. Maureen has a really great question on where we can find data that says online teaching can be as or more effective. I rely pretty heavily on the work of Barbara Means, M-E-A-N-S. She has led various studies that show this, and in particular, I'm pretty sure the year is 2014, a meta-analysis showing that learning outcomes, again, can be more effective in online. I think the conclusion of that report as well has to do with blended being really, really optimal. And that's coming out very frequently now, that when we are able to have the best of both worlds, the asynchronous for the flexibility and the in-person for more engagement and connection in that way, blended can be yeah, thank you to those of you who are putting some chats in. Blended can be ideal, but there is evidence to show that online outcomes can be better, actually. It's just a matter of figuring out how we do it well. Thank you, Maureen. I see your follow-up comment. And I think that your department chairs are right, because online courses can be very inequitable for students. We know that students of color fare worse in online classes. We know that attrition rates are higher in online classes, exactly for all the reasons we talked about today: the lack of connection, lack of motivation, the lack of a schedule. Quite frankly, if you sign up for a class that's Tuesday, Thursday, 9:30 a.m., if nothing else, you're going to try to get to that class meeting. Online classes require a lot more independence and autonomy, even if we're there being present and engaged. And so, yeah, there are very inequitable outcomes with online classes, but there's a lot that we can do to overcome those. And for me, it has the most important thing we can do is to prepare our faculty to be effective in these spaces. So, I see another couple of good pieces coming in. Thank you, Peter. I do see a question from Camille. Again, Mark, is there anything before Camille's, or shall I jump to that one?
That's the one I was going to point out.
Super, thank you so much. And now I already lost it. New modalities that I see persisting. Yeah, thanks. All of them, quite frankly. The benefit of doing what I get to do, which is to keep a very careful finger on the pulse, a very attentive eye on the media and on what's happening in higher ed, and then in conversations with faculty and instructional designers and administrators. This is the bulk of what I do these days. Online teaching is not going away. HyFlex, in however you define that term, there are various definitions. It is not going away. More hybrid and more blended. These will be more prevalent. Many colleges and universities that didn't really do much in the way of online have figured out they need to do more. Dual streaming, which is my favorite term for when you have students in the classroom and other students joining on Zoom, dual streaming or blended synchronous, that's going to be continuing to be a thing. So if I think about future proofing, certainly asynchronous is not going to go away. That is the largest and historically the largest percentage of online classes are asynchronous. And again, that enables people to get college credentials who otherwise wouldn't be able to. So that's going to absolutely continue. But when I think about future proofing our classes, the more we can figure out about how to be effective in synchronous and asynchronous environments, the better prepared we're going to be for whatever is around the corner, so that we're not caught like we were 2 years ago, completely underprepared to teach in online spaces. So my big recommendation here is to develop more activities. And let me caution, I'm not saying all at once, right? In stages, in iterations, create more asynchronous, engaging materials and activities, because that asynchronous backbone, as Bonnie Stachowiak calls it, is the way that we are going to have the most agility and flexibility for our increasingly precarious world. That's the way I think about that. What else has come in?
So Maureen Larson had a comment, and was wondering if the use of so much multimedia now, along with the interactive apps, is changing the way people look at online learning. It seems to be much more effective now.
100%. Yes, absolutely. We can do more. In fact, that's actually the topic of the new book project that I'm working on, is emotion science and teaching with technology, not just online classes, but what can we do with media, with the amazing things that technology does to engage our students, things like Kahoot, things like beautiful slides. We can really grab and harness people's emotions, and we can do it way more effectively when we apply. I'm a big fan of Richard Mayer's multimedia theory also. We need to be careful not to have bells and whistles just for bells and whistles on our slides, or those kinds of things. There's sound theoretical principles to follow. But very early in the pandemic, I heard Gardner Campbell say, he's a leading voice in ed tech. I heard him say, imagine if this had happened 20 years ago. Our learning management systems were way underdeveloped. We didn't have Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and all these things the way that we do now. So yes, things are advancing. They're going to continue to do so, and we can create much more invigorating experiences for our students as a result. What else has come in?
So Matt had a question, if you were concerned about the decline of the use of instructional designers with course design. He seems to sense some concern.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I did kind of glimpse that that question. I'm curious what we mean by the decline of use of IDs, unless maybe what you mean is faculty were thrown in at the deep end on, again, a couple of years ago, and have been in that deep end, needing to figure out what they do. So yes and no. Essentially, Matt, I'll answer very honestly. I have been teaching college classes for 26 years. I was an instructional designer officially, although I would argue that every faculty is an instructional designer. We all plan our instruction, but I had that title for 7 years. And on the one hand, I know, of course, that instructional designers are hugely valuable and often underutilized. On the other hand, I believe that faculty do what they do, which is to get their head down and figure out what they're going to do in their classes. And so instead of maybe thinking about decline of instructional designers because they're hotly in demand right now, that's a part of universities and colleges recognizing the need for increased support, I would say, how can we be, as IDs, how can we be supportive and help faculty also gain competencies and skills and theoretical knowledge, so that they don't have to rely on us necessarily, because they don't. they do what they do. They figure out their classes. So I don't know, that's kind of a nuanced answer, but I would love to see more IDs better utilized and more, I would say, elevated for the value of the work that they offer to our faculty. And I believe simultaneously, we also need to be equipping faculty to work in their own way as well.
See, I'll try to get through all of them. Jessamine Newhouse asks, can you say a bit more about the disappropriate emotional labor that falls to women and all the faculty of color, and how that impacts the way we may incorporate emotions into our teaching?
Yes, thank you, Jessamine. So good to see you. And a really great question that is, I'm going to be very honest, outside of my area of expertise. It's not the subject of the new book. I haven't done extensive research on that. However, let's acknowledge that emotion itself is gendered, and that many people see teaching and teachers as women's work, and women are the one who are caring and nurturing, and that's a very historically prevalent sort of perception. Yes, there is emotional labor that goes into what we do, and it is unequally distributed, right? We know that depending on your identities and the privileges that you claim, you may feel more, maybe you feel less drained by the emotional labor. We know again that underrepresented, I shouldn't say that, identities that don't have the same degree of privilege, there's more anxiety. There was an awesome piece by Tom Tobin and Shavella Pittman, which I'm sure you know, Jessamine, about how faculty of color and other identities who may not feel very safe can't always implement all the recommendations that we like to give about more empathy and more flexibility for students, because their students take advantage of that. So nuance is where I would go with that question, in terms of we all need to think carefully about how we can put emotions to work, how we can guard our own well-being, and protect time for our own self-care so that we have some emotional reserves. And yeah, that's a really big question, but thanks for raising it.
I think we have time for one or two more. Any thoughts on facilitating emotional contagion between students asynchronously? And that came from Caroline.
Yeah, great question. Essentially, the more that we can do to build relationships and trust between students asynchronously is going to support that kind of that emotional contagion between them as well. So we all know, here's a common example: group projects, students hate them because there's always going to be the schmuck who's not going to do the work, and there's a lack of trust there. Anything that we can do to overturn that kind of experience or that expectation, whether we have community norms and guidelines that we set at the beginning of the class, whether we indulge some class time in playing games, or in creating activities that help our students. Like, I'm a big fan of taking class time, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, build in activities to help students get to know each other and bond with each other in very, very silly and person-to-person connections kinds of ways, because that will develop that trusting environment, that will overcome that natural lack of trust that my group mate is going to help me, or the person in the discussion board is really going to engage meaningfully with me. So for me, it's actually all about relationship building and getting to know each other. And here's one quick activity that I absolutely love. It's new to me. I've used it a few times. I love it. I call it Share One Photo. I got it from an amazing faculty member in Wisconsin called Tom Seleska. Ask students to go through their existing photo library. Don't go out and take a new picture, but on your smartphone, go through your photo library, choose one photo that is meaningful, and post that in a discussion forum as an example. Write a couple of sentences or record a quick video about how that represents, something that you want to share. It's so powerful. It really, really helps students open up and get to know each other. And you may even consider doing something like that more than once, right? Periodically, to sustain that welcome, to foster those relationships when students feel connected with each other. I've been using Flipgrid for the same reason. In my asynchronous class, they're going to support and trust each other much more effectively.
Well, Flower, sometimes a plan comes together. I think we got through all the questions.
Wow, that is awesome. It's so good to see. You could hear I was going a million miles a minute, but hopefully people got some ideas.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you spending some time with us. Thank you for saying yes again. And I look forward to catching up with you online, face to face, wherever our paths may cross.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mark. Alex, if I'm not mistaken, you had a few things to finish us out. And again, I'll just thank everybody for being here and taking this time today, or watching the recording if that's the way you're engaging. Thank you.
Well,